Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rod Escayola, and I'm a condominium lawyer with Gowling WLG. Welcome to CondoVirus episode 9. Who would have guessed we would have been doing this for so long? This week's episode, we're very optimistic, and we've entitled it "Coming Out of the Dark." I mean, last week we saw the light at the end of the tunnel. Now we're coming out of the dark timidly and carefully and cautiously, but we are coming out of the dark. So as most of you know, we've been hosting these webinars for 9 weeks now, and week after week, we call upon key industry experts to come in and answer your questions. Keep your questions coming, and that's really how we build our agendas. So week after week, I find these key industry experts who very generously answer the call of duty, and they accept to share their knowledge and their expertise and their experience in an attempt to give practical answers to your very practical questions. So what I'll do like I've done every other week. I'll go around, I'll introduce our key speakers. Now, a manager from Crossbridge speaking here on behalf of ACMO. We have the super nanny of management. Good evening, Catherine Gow.
Welcome, everybody.
Your sound's not very loud. I'm not sure if you want to bring the microphone a bit closer.
Maybe we'll see if that's a little better.
Perfect. From Lash Condo Law and speaking on behalf of CAI Canada, we have Diana Prince by Day, the Wonder Woman of AGMs. Good evening, Denise Lash.
Hello, everyone.
Now, Josh Milgram is absent today, fighting crime, one town hall at a time. And so we're back to our condo twins. We have a condo lawyer with Gowling WLG, our very own Grizzly Adam. Good evening, Graham McPherson.
Hi, everybody.
And another condo lawyer with Gowling WLG, having gotten recently acquainted with his newly acquired trimmer, a now cleanly shaven Jumanji. Hello, David Plotkin.
Good evening, everyone.
Oh, we didn't see you, or did we?
Yeah, we did.
We did.
Anyway.
Perfect.
Maybe it's at the bottom, yeah.
From the National Life Safety Group, our own Magnum PI, Jason Reed. Good evening.
Good evening.
You're going to be doing all the heavy lifting today, Jason. Hope you're ready. Sandy Fold is taking the week off, so we've recruited an Ottawa voice, the voice of reason from Apollo Property Management. Hello, Sean Cornish.
Hello, Rod and everyone. It's good to be here. I was anxiously awaiting your introduction to see what you'd say. That's great.
I'm always kinder for the first visit. Wait till next week.
Appreciate it.
Finally, jumping in to discuss pool issues in condos, we have somebody from Ottawa Pool Works. Good evening, Ryan Van Ness.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here.
Okay, we'll probably have to turn your video off when your turn comes because you're a bit garbly. Graham, can you turn the video off maybe? Now, as we have in the past weeks, we've received hundreds of questions from all you folks. And again, we're going to try to tackle as many of them as possible, but we really want to focus this week on the topic of coming out of the dark. What's the next chapter that we're going to be facing? So we're going to focus on that. I see that the chat room has lit up already. A lot of people asking questions and answering questions. We're going to try our best to bring some questions into the presentation, but I'm reassured because I see all sorts of very good resources out there in the chat room. I see Michael, I see Bob, I see CCI people, I see all sorts of managers. So that's great. Feel free to share information. That's what we're here for people to share information. Now let's go. These are the list of topics we're going to cover today. And you've guessed it, your favorite part, my disclaimer. As we do every week, I have to put a bit of a disclaimer. For those of you watching this webinar, please remember that whenever we refer to legislation, we refer to Ontario legislation. That's where we're from. That's where we work out of. And so for those of you listening from elsewhere, you'll need to adapt that to your jurisdiction. Keep in mind as well that the information we provide you today, to the best of our ability, is accurate as of the day of this broadcast, today, May 13, 2020. The situation changes on a daily basis. Denise and I, we spent the weekend working on a segment for this webinar, and we flushed it all today, or was it yesterday, when the province adopted a new piece of legislation. So whatever we say is valid today. If you're watching this as a rebroadcast later, you may have to adapt it a bit. Keep in mind also that the information we provide you today here is of a general nature, right? It may not necessarily apply to your specific situation. It's important that you seek professional advice to answer questions and to address your very specific reality of whatever it is that you're living. And finally, please note that this session is recorded. We'll be uploading it as we have done with all the other past webinars. You can watch them on demand as often as you want. It's free. And so we're recording it and then we upload it on the Condo Advisor website. You can access it by clicking the webinar tab at the top right, and then you can find whichever episode you want to watch, or you can binge watch them all in succession. There it is. It's going to take us a few days to upload them. Just be patient with us. So that's for this. Now, diving in. I think I'm getting quite deficient at this intro and disclaimers. I think we're shaving some time here. I'm going to turn to you, Graham. There's been quite a few announcements since last week. Some announcements deal with reopening, some announcements deal with extending the period of emergency, and there's a brand new piece of legislation that was dropped on our lap yesterday that affects the Condominium Act. So let's start maybe with Graham, with the extension of the period of emergency.
Yes, so the provincial government has announced that the official emergency period has been extended till June 2nd, 2020. And people in chat are ahead of the curve on this one and have beaten me to that punch in that announcement. But there it is. Whether this will get extended again or not, we can't know until the time comes, but that's the timeline we're dealing with for now. In terms of other openings or updates we've received from the province, retail stores with street entrances are now allowed to provide curbside pickup and deliveries. Garden centers, nurseries, safety supply stores, and those stores can open their doors now to the public in the same sense that grocery stores can open their doors, in that everyone who's in there has to respect the social distancing rules. And provincial parks and conservation reserves are now open for limited day use access. In addition, more on par with the condominium theme, residential construction projects where the project is a condominium are now allowed by the province. We're going to talk about that a little more later on in this presentation, but what's important to keep in mind, I'll say now and as I'll probably repeat again, are that just because the province has said that's okay, doesn't mean that corporations must allow any and all renovations to happen in any way the renovator wants, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Unfortunately, the Ontario government seems to have been aware that we were presenting today and has promised that they would be providing more updates tomorrow. So I suppose you'll have to tune in next week to get my spiel on that. In other news, the Ontario Real Estate Association, commonly known as OREA, has clarified that in-person condo showings are permitted, but still not open houses. And they are still urging their members to engage in virtual showings wherever possible. And lastly, as Rod said, yesterday we were gifted the COVID-19 Response and Reforms to Modernize Ontario Act 2020. And this has had the effect of amending a few pieces of legislation, including the Condominium Act, and we'll get into how it's done that.
Okay. And I'm going to add maybe that the reopening of retail store with street entrances, that may affect people, condominium corporations that have mixed use or that have some commercial space at the bottom. Yeah. So don't be surprised if people are now reopening their stores and there's people lining up outside. And also, are you going to tackle now or later the are you going to expand on Bill 190?
Yeah, that I believe I've got some slides on that in the next.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess Bill 190, and maybe go back actually a slide so that makes more sense. So Bill 190 has essentially done two things. For those who were present for this webinar where I talked about the extensions to hold your AGMs, what Bill 190 has done is actually codified those into the Condominium Act. And for those of you who weren't there for that presentation, don't worry, because we're going to go over those deadline extensions again. And what it's also done is set a timeline during which condos can hold virtual AGMs without a bylaw permitting them to do so.
Right, so it did really two things. It addressed scheduling and
And
it
method.
addressed the method, so the how you can deal with meetings electronically. Okay, so do you want to help us out with the scheduling?
Yes, sure. So what I've done here is put together hopefully a helpful visual representation of how the scheduling is going to work for AGMs. So under Bill 190, which codified the order in council, if your AGM was supposed to take place anytime during the emergency period, as of now, the emergency period ends on June 2nd, but that may very well be extended, so we haven't put any dates in here. But if your AGM was to be due during the emergency period, it's now due 90 days after that emergency period ends.
Right, and by now due, you mean you can take up to an additional 90 days
Yeah.
to hold it, right?
That's
right.
that 90th day after the emergency ends is the last day that you could hold it on.
Right, because both the order in council and this new piece of legislation, what they do is they allow, and I think Denise will talk about that, but they allow every corporation to pick one of two things. You can either hold your meeting now electronically, or you can postpone it. But if you're going to postpone it, that's what you're talking about, Graham. You're talking about if you're going to postpone it, you got to fit within that 90-day period at the latest, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Okay, so let's move on.
So then, if your AGM falls within the 30-day period after the emergency ends, so let's say the emergency does end on June 2nd, and your AGM was supposed to be held on June 3rd or June 4th or all the way to June 20th. If you fall in that 30-day grace period, you're given a new deadline of 120 days after the emergency ends.
Right, and as you can see, the little purple line goes all the way to the emergency. So the 120 days is calculated from the end of the emergency, not from the end of that 30-day grace period, right?
Yes.
Okay, so
exactly.
Folks, if you're going to postpone your AGM, you either have 90 days following the end of the emergency whenever that happens, or you have 120 days following the end of the emergency. But you could hold them electronically at any given time, and we'll talk about that. So how does that affect, or does it affect in any way, all the notice periods, Graham, like the 35 days and the 15 days? How does that work?
Well, I'm glad you asked. So the notice periods are still in effect, and those notice periods are you need to send the preliminary notice of an AGM 35 days before it, and you need to send the general notice 15 days before it. And I'm sure you're all out there saying, well, gee, I wish there was some handy tool I could use to do that. Well, never fear, because I am going to steal the screen from Rod for a minute and show you a handy dandy way to do it. Can everyone see my internet right now?
We can.
Okay, thank you. So if you literally Google AGM calculator, you'll come to the Condo Advisor website, hopefully, and click this.
There's a shameful plug.
I'm not ashamed of anything, Rod.
Proud.
And then so it's very easy. All you do is click this date, select when your AGM was supposed to be. Let's say it's June 12th. This will show you when your preliminary notice must be given, when owner's window is to provide materials, and when the formal general notice must be given.
Like magic.
Just like it.
Okay, let me see if I can figure out how to gain the screen again. That may be tricky. Okay, wonderful. You should be back on the slides now. Okay, so that's for Bill 190. And as you said, it's basically codified something that existed before. And one of the questions that came on the chat, I've lost the chat now, but it was, let me just see here if I can find the chat again to refresh my memory. If you hold the AGM within 90 days following the end of the emergency period, oh, it moved up now. Are you able to do so without a bylaw? So you got to keep in mind that there's, I think Graham spoke of really two things, or the bill spoke of two things. One thing is the decision to postpone. That decision to postpone, you don't need a bylaw for that. The legislation now allows you to postpone in 90 days or 120 days. The question of the bylaw will be more relevant when we talk about electronic meetings and electronic voting. So we'll get back to that. So to answer the question, you don't need a bylaw. So we spoke about this, and now we're going to turn to our two condo managers. We're now talking about the easing of restriction, and people are getting all excited. So Graham presented the plan on paper. We're slowly and cautiously easing on certain restrictions. Now we need to see how this plan applies in the trenches, and I'm going to turn to both of you, the two managers, Sean and Catherine, and in a couple of words each, so we don't run out of time here, where are we at on this? So I'm not sure which one was going to tackle, but let's start with window cleaning. Has anything
I think
changed?
I've traditionally held the window cleaning, but Sean, you can also disagree with me if you don't agree. I would love to say that window cleaning is essential, and it is still not. So unless you are looking specifically at a concern over falling cladding, falling glass, that type of thing, it is cleaning. It is not strictly necessary for sanitation. What you might want to do, however, is look to ensure you do have your roof anchor inspection completed, and whether or not you could observe physical distancing and scheduling for that, because I think that is likely to be one of the projects that we can do, and sooner rather than later.
Okay, and I hate to use the L word again, but Joanne really wanted me to do it. So what about landscaping? Has the landscaping changed? Who's tackling this?
Well, I can certainly touch on that a little bit, at least from our perspective. The landscaping has changed rapidly, or the landscape has changed rapidly in the last week or so. And what we've seen with, well, let's say 10 days, with most of the landscaping contracts beginning at the start of May, everything except for improvements seems to be acceptable within Ottawa. And that's looking at the provincial restrictions as well as the Ottawa Public Health recommendations. So what we're seeing is most landscaping companies are, with physical distancing and proper personal protective equipment, conducting the basic landscaping duties. We are not seeing any allowances for new plantings or betterments or improvements. It's strictly the required maintenance.
Right. Okay. Very good. Is any one of you dealing with volunteers that are just suffering from extreme cabin fever, and they want to go out and they want to participate to planting flowers and all of that? So how do we tackle this? I'm not sure which one of the two of you would do that.
So I am of the viewpoint that, whether it's done by somebody who's paid or somebody who is volunteering, the same restrictions, if you will, apply. And one of the reasons why the restrictions are there is to prevent the commingling of households. And so we are still under an emergency order that is looking for us to stay home and stay safe. And so the only interesting thing that I think I've discovered during the last week or so is the opportunity in insurance riders to cover volunteers or board members who have an illness or would make a claim against the corporation by virtue of their volunteer work. I think that's interesting. Probably most applies to, for instance, townhomes, but I don't think that changes my opinion with respect to whether or not having a volunteer does it is a loophole. Remember, I'm not in favor of loopholes.
Okay. Garage cleaning, Sean, are you the one tackling this?
Yeah, it's, I mean, Catherine's point is, underlines all of this, which is we shouldn't be looking for loopholes. We shouldn't be looking for ways to get around this. Having said that, there are legitimate reasons to want to proceed with garage cleaning. The main concern that we have with that is getting people out of their units, moving their cars, and meeting each other in the elevators, the hallways, etc. So that's the reason not to do it. But on the flip side, we have had corporations where they've carefully orchestrated the clearing of vehicles, in stages for different parkade levels, etc., timing how people leave, and they've proceeded with it because they're concerned about their drainage systems in the garages or the membranes, etc. So there has been a push for it. There's certainly a large push by the contractors, but our advice is always to show caution, be conservative, and not proceed unless you really need to.
Okay, very good. How about work in requiring access to units? And I guess maybe let's break it down. So maybe corporation work in units, and then we'll tackle after that owners wishing to do work in their units.
So I remain of the opinion, if and when it's an emergency, and I know that Jason's going to cover a little bit more specifically, ensuring that staff members or contracted people who need to go in case of an emergency are observing all of the universal protections, as well as wearing appropriate PPE if they were to need to go in. We are not, however, scheduling work that would take us into suites, and that includes at this particular point in time also for annual fire and life safety in suite inspections, and that's a fairly big, fairly substantial thing. It doesn't mean that you're not going to do all of those testing requirements on the common elements in places where that can be safely done. When it comes to capital work, I do believe that under the emergency order, construction work that was permitted before the 4th of April is permitted and permissible. My concern is always about the impact on people living in their suites. So one, whether or not it can be done safely is first and foremost, but very, very soon afterwards, we have to consider the impact on people who are still safe at home, working from home, educating children from home. And so some of those projects that are very, very noisy, very smelly, very disruptive, it may be better to be looking to and working with your service provider in order to maybe even kick that into next year. But that's the analysis piece that in past episodes, Justin Tudor had helped us with. And I think that governance still remains.
Right, and that I think is applicable whether we're talking about capital work outside or work within the building. What about, Sean, what about unit owners that wish to do some renovations? How do we tackle that? Have we changed our position?
No, we're still maintaining the same position as Catherine alluded to, that April 4th timeline. Work that had begun before April 4th, we are allowing to proceed or to complete. But in all cases, what we're pushing for again is just getting to a habitable state and not looking at, certainly not approving or allowing new work to begin. And most of the work that would have been approved before April 4th has been completed by now in any event, as far as those renovations go. Just one point Catherine had raised earlier about the roof anchor inspections. The requirement to inspect the anchors hasn't changed. So that is something that you want to be ready for when everything opens up. One of the issues that we run into in some properties is those roof anchors that are on exclusive use common elements that would require access to an owner's unit. And at this point, again, we're recommending not to inspect those because we're trying to avoid any unnecessary work or access to units.
Right.
There's that distinction between the rooftop anchors that are purely common element and we can easily get to, and those that require access to owners' units.
Right, that's a very good point.
Mm-hmm.
And so some managers need to put their foot down to tell Unit 306 that he or she won't be able to complete the work, or what she wants to do is more than making it inhabitable. And so sometimes when the COVID hits the fan, then the lawyers need to come in. And so Graham, how do we tackle that? How have we dealt with this?
So in cases where we've been involved in this, I mean, it comes to that issue of what's required to make a unit habitable. And the other consideration is, in order to bring that about, what steps can we take to ensure that everybody's safety is being upheld? So in terms of habitability, the things we need to consider are probably, are all the utilities connected, heating, plumbing, electricity? Are the appliances in? Is there flooring? Questions like paint, for example, on the walls. I mean, we'd all prefer to live in a painted space that looks nice, but does that make it habitable? I'm not convinced. So that's kind of the case-by-case analysis that condominiums are going to have to do when considering these kind of renovation issues. And then the other analysis that they're going to have to engage in are, how can we make this happen in a way that minimizes risk? So things to consider are, how many trades are going to need to come in? Can we schedule it so that they only come in one at a time, one person at a time? Can we control the hours during which they're coming in and out of the building? Is there a service elevator that we could delegate them to? And are we making sure that they're wearing the correct PPE?
One of the questions that came up on the chat room was somebody was under the impression that renovations in units were now allowed with the various changes done by the province. And so our reading of this is this. The general statement about construction hasn't changed. Renovations that were commenced before a specific date, I think it's April 4th,
Yeah.
would be permitted to continue. Having said that, what is allowed at the provincial level does not mean that it shall proceed at the corporate level. The condo corporations are the fourth level of government. You have federal, provincial, municipal, condo land. And every level of government can be more restrictive, not more permissive than the level above them. So the fact that the province says you can do X, Y, Z doesn't mean that the corporation necessarily has to allow it. And also with respect to the recent changes to the corporation, to the construction restrictions, I guess and this is I think what the viewer is referring to, the changes were this: work below grade work could commence, and above grade work that was commenced before a certain period of time could also continue. But that brings us back to, does this corporation feel that allowing it is in the best interest of the corporation? Is it safe to do? Is it desirable to be done? They control the common elements for the greater good of the community.
And at the end of the day, I think the answer to that question is going to depend on a weighing of the factors that I discussed earlier.
Yeah,
I agree. And the other thing too is, if we still have a number of people who are safe at home, even something like a garage project where you feel that you're not having people, commingle, you have addressed some of the issues of physical distancing in spaces like elevators and cleaning and all of the rest of it, you still have the mobilization challenge of where people are going to park their automobiles, for instance, if you were to be doing an underground garage project. So there are, again, as has been discussed previously, there's a hierarchy of considerations that needs to be undertaken.
Right. Okay, so we got to move on. Paulette, you may want to make sure that when you chat on the chat room that you address your questions to everybody, not just the panelists. That way other people will be able to jump in and help you and provide some guidance. David, we're running out of time, so I'm turning to you. Skipping over Sean, I'm turning to you, David, and I'm going to ask you this question. How do we deal with returning contractors? Because now, slowly but surely, they're coming out of a long hibernation, wanting to work, they're hungry, just like bears coming out of the woodwork. How do we deal with that?
For sure, and this is something that we're getting a lot of questions recently, especially with the slow easing of restrictions, and it makes sense. I mean, contractors want to get back to work and they want to be able to complete tasks so that they can get funds for their work, and also that they don't have a glut of work that all has to be done once it all opens all at the same time. So one of the things we're suggesting, and has been decently well received on both ends, is having a health screener for any incoming contractors that are coming in. This is pretty easy to do. You have, management or someone meet them at the front, and you just have them fill out a screener. It's a quick questionnaire, follows public health guidelines. Do you have a fever? Have you experienced any of the symptoms within 14 days? Have you had international travel? And if they're answering yes to any of these, they're not being allowed onto the premises. That's just a liability issue for the corporation. And in the same health questionnaire, you could also have what we've dubbed, a COVID-19 health protocol. So again, reminding the contractors that when they're on the premises of the corporation, there are certain requirements they need to fulfill. These are all the public health guidelines, physical distancing, not attending on site with more than 5 workers, and then the management or whoever the agent of the corporation having them sign off on this is also showing them where the hand washing facilities are, where they could be getting PPE if it needs to be provided by them or by the contractor. And this is generally well received, and people are happy to do it because it's really just following the guidance of the health authorities. The bigger question is when the contractor is pushing hard to come and the corporation doesn't really want them to. How do you push back, or how do you then protect the corporation itself from liability? And this can be done with an indemnity and a release agreement that you can ask your counsel to help you with. You're essentially saying to the contractor, if you want to come, the province is allowing it, that's fine, but we don't want to be on the hook for the liability that may result from you being there, even though you can be, as we've been saying, you don't have to be. So there are agreements that can be drafted where you're then shifting the burden of that liability onto the contractor. And often, from our experience so far, the contractor, when faced with this legal agreement, will back down and say, okay, I know I'm allowed to do this, but I'm not going to do this right now. I agree with you. Let's do this in the future. No problem.
Right, and basically the objective is if somebody really wants to be there, there's all sorts of risks that are associated sometimes with more contractors, more traffic, more people on site, et cetera, et cetera. And the waivers and indemnity agreements are also very useful when dealing with if you're in a gray zone where the contractor says, I'm allowed to do it, the province allows me to do it, and we're thinking, oh, well, I'm not too sure actually. And so, well, if you really think you're allowed, well, let's sign an indemnity and a agreement. And if somebody gets fined or if somebody gets hurt, well, then you're going to wear it. Okay, so that's for that. Now, moving on to Jason. Jason, our main topic today is, oh, let me just see here. Why do I have this slide here? I think we've dealt with this, Graham, so let me just move it here. The main topic today is reopening of amenities, and Jason has done a tremendous job. He's put together a very comprehensive set of slides, and we're going to tackle this one amenity at the time. And we're going to be asking ourselves these questions, like, should we open it? And if we're going to open it, you know, what should we consider if we're going to decide to open it or not? And if we are thinking of opening it, what precautions should we put in place? So I'm going to turn the microphone to you, Jason. Now, there's a lot of words on the slides, folks. Hopefully, you're not viewing this on your phone, but the slide deck will be uploaded on the Condo Advisor. And rather than cut some wording out, I decided to leave it all in to allow you later on to review this and sort of be able to do the same exercise that Jason will do now. So to you, Jason.
Thank you very much. Yeah, listen, the whole thought process behind this was what are the considerations now? What are we looking at to open now? And quite simply, we want to provide that amenity space to residents, and we want to give them an opportunity to contribute to their mental and physical health. And I think those same considerations apply to all the amenities, or most of them. Then it was pretty important to identify what's the standards in Ontario and Canada and maybe internationally. What are others doing? So we've listed some here. I don't want to go through them all, but the general feel is that facilities that are opening up are not opening up their individual shared fitness rooms. Then we started taking a look as a team, considerations for the plans to reopen. So first of all, we don't.
So I'm going to stop you, Jason. I want to go back to the first two columns for a second. And so, and this is part of the exercise. And Jason, I mean, you've raised it from the beginning. So you're looking at every amenities, and you're wondering, well, why would we open it? Well, like, what's the driving force behind opening it? Is it essential? Is it not essential, etc. But the second column to me is going to be, in many cases, your guide. What are other people doing? Is the YMCA opening their gym? If they're not, why would you open yours? What are hotels doing? If they're not opening their facilities, why would you open yours, right? And I think it's important. And this, Jason, this is almost a weekly sort of exercise. This is not a snapshot forever, right? I mean, every week you should really ask yourself these questions.
Absolutely, because in 7 days from now, you may see some small gyms or shared fitness facilities open. And this, you can actually use this document on a 7 or 10 day basis to kind of gauge your balance so that when you do have or meet the justification to open them, you can. And that's why we've even put in the considerations to open. So as an example, I mean, these are not generic, but they're pretty important. So we need to make sure we're booking and scheduling these without having residents come down to the lobby, utilize a shared pen, and book these. So contactless booking or scheduling. We need to make sure we're maintaining 6 feet distance within all of the fitness area. That may mean removing equipment, reshaping them, or putting them in a row where you can have plexiglass in between. But one of the most important items I found was that because you're in a shared fitness area with aerobic equipment, you've already got an increase of respiratory rate. That means you're going to have an increase of whatever it is you expel when you breathe hard. So don't use the 6 feet there for all equipment that is generating a higher respiratory rate. You'd have to go further than 6 feet. There are no clear data anywhere, whether it's the CDC or whether it's Canadian Public Health, on what those further distances are. But there is numerous pieces of documentation, including the Industrial Hygiene Association of America, that's come out and said it needs to be further than 6 feet.
Right. So depending on the exercise, I guess some machine make you exercise moistly. I guess that's the reference that we have. I had to go there.
You did.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah,
And I never exercised again.
So Jason, do I go to the next amenity?
Listen, I want to focus on one more because it applies
Sure.
to all of them, and I won't hit it on the next amenity, but it's
Okay.
vitally important. Develop an incident response procedure in the event a resident or employee tests positive. And that includes the documentation needed to respond, to communicate, to sanitize, to trace, and to potentially notify as best you can where that contact has been made.
Right. And for very, very small gym rooms, like at my condo, we don't have somewhere else to put our machines, and we can't really reorganize them. And we only have one of each, a bike, a treadmill, and whatever the other machine is, the elliptical. And so I guess maybe for these small gym facilities, one of the option is if you're going to reopen it, when you're going to reopen it, maybe you limit it to one person use. And so that goes back to you, your suggestion to have some kind of a booking or a scheduling sort of system. Whereas before, 3 of us could exercise at the same time. Well, maybe now for the near future, we won't. Maybe it's going to be one at a time. So let me move to the next amenity. Right.
So this one's saunas and hot tubs. So quite simply, every ounce of evidence points to keep these things closed until further notice. Once you are considering to open these up, you're probably going to remain limited to one guest or family at a time. You're looking at cleaning after each use, the same incident response procedure. But something that's very important here is, as with all amenities, when you're weighing the facts and the considerations to open and close, you have to consider the time amount that is involved with the cleaning process. For example, in a gym, the cleaning may take 20 minutes. And it may take longer because the material or the cleaning agent you're using may have specific directions to let this stuff dry for 5 minutes on the equipment. So now you're at 25 minutes. So if you're doing that once an hour by scheduling a resident, one person to use it, you're going to have to find a cleaner just to stand outside that door and service that amenity once every 60 minutes. So that may be a consideration as well.
Right. Absolutely.
Next one.
Okay. I went to fitness hobby rooms, I guess.
So hobby rooms, I'm not going to go over the same ones apply here, but you need to make sure you have new rules and procedures for how you're going to schedule it, how people can go in, they can use the room, and when they leave. Specifically, a hand sanitized bottle mounted at the front entrance, where if you're going to use this room, you have to hand sanitize on the way in and hand sanitize on the way out. Shared equipment, you've got to remove all this. In fact, your hobby rooms, this is an important note, should never have shared tools, for the simple reason is that it's a significant liability for the boards. But if you do, you want to limit those shared equipment because that just increases your cleaning capabilities, and have everybody bring their own.
Right. Okay. Then guest suites.
Guest suites. This one's, what are others doing? So hotels are currently not open. Hotels in Quebec, I believe, are or in the process of opening in Quebec. This one has some unique risks or considerations, if you will. A guest rotation or a room rotation plan should be developed to allow the proper time for that air circulation within that suite to clear out. I don't know what that time is right now, but as an example, it might be every 3 days.
Right. Okay.
There's no way for you to, unless you're bringing in fogging machines and UV lights every night, you're probably better off opening it up and allowing and meeting some of these requirements. But then you've got some additional tasks and cleanings. So the cleaners are now going into these amenities once an hour, once a morning, whatever the schedule is. But they've got to don and doff, which means take on and take off new gloves and new masks every time they do it. So do you have the PPE to give those cleaners, or does the cleaning company have that PPE to do that? Because you could be running 30, 40 masks a day.
Right.
In
Right,
some
right.
condominiums. So there's additional cost, there's additional manpower. There's a lot of considerations to opening these.
And oh wow, I guess there's some fancy condos outside of Ottawa. There's a theater room.
So the only one, the same considerations apply to the majority of the amenities. But one of the ones I really like about this one is there's a lot of touch points, couches and pillows. How are you disinfecting those? It's not something you run a Lysol wipe over top. So you've got a lot of touch points that you can not necessarily remove. And in order to clean a theater room, you could spend a good hour to 2 hours. I mean, how do you know? So when you're going with the cleaning, you want to make sure you're documenting that cleaning as well.
Yeah, for sure. First world problems for theater rooms. Oh, this is great.
I don't go on to much here because we've got an
Right.
expert here with us. But quite simply, this is what we found. The pools are closed. There is no evidence, as per CDC, that the COVID-19 is transmitted via water, but there are also a significant amount of touch points. All I've done here is go to the next slide for me, sir.
Sure.
And here's some resources that you can use that are accepted as, accepted resources in Canada. It's through the Life Saving Society.
Okay, and this is where I'm going to turn to Ryan, and you won't see him. We've turned the image off, but you'll hear him, and that's what's important. Ryan Van Ness from Ottawa Pool Works. I guess, Ryan, let's tackle this in two steps. We're going to talk about opening we're going to talk about the physical opening of the pools, but also about the opening of the pools to the public. And let's start with that. I mean, what is your industry sort of preparing for? What's around the bend with respect to returning public pools?
Well, currently right now, we're kind of preparing for opening of the recreational amenities on a limited basis, primarily speaking in terms of bather load. Much of what I'm going to say and touch on is going to be more or less Jason has kind of already discussed. But the big thing is that as we are kind of discussing is not kind of assume that COVID is kind of transmittable through sanitized water. So what we're more or less kind of preparing for, again, what Jason was saying on managing of shared spaces, is how are we going to be keeping people, keeping the numbers down on people coming into the pool area, specifically change rooms. This is going to more or less change the operation because, for Class B pools that are unsupervised, the access to the change rooms, washrooms, a lot of these shared facilities need to have attendance, or we need to now work out some sort of booking or scheduling for people to be going in there. But the problem, what we are saying, is not going to be the water itself. It's going to be the equipment that surrounds it, your ladders, your handrails, your life pole, your vacuuming equipment. Most areas of transmission will probably be in change rooms and washrooms. So how that's going to work out is, going to be up to, again, owners and managers to determine how we can adhere to social distancing should recreational amenities be lifted. But I think that that's going to be the primary problem for indoor Class B facilities to take a look at.
Okay, so a couple of points that I want to bring to the forefront here that you said, and I want to emphasize them. So one of them, and both of you touched upon that, I mean, the studies maybe eventually will teach us more about how this virus sort of reacts in water. But right now, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention is quite clear that the issue is not the transmission through water, because as you said, the sanitized water, the chlorine, and also the salt. Is the salt effective, Ryan?
Yeah, the salt essentially gives off a chlorine residual. So, more or less, what public health in Ottawa anyway was telling us is that as long as a chlorine residual of at least 1 part per million is present in the water, that it does not pose as much of a risk as it would in change rooms, washrooms, and on equipment ladders and handrails as well. So
right. So the issue is that the issue is maybe not so much the water, but is the equipment, and you've listed quite a few. I mean, how often are we going to get to clean the buoys and the ladder and the handrail and the noodles and the aqua fitness equipment? So that is going to be an issue, and also the proximity. And you spoke of bather load. What's that?
Correct. So I mean, you know, when it comes down to Class A and Class B pools, you know, the difference being Class A is public, and the Class B is more or less private. So what we're more or less looking at is that even for some of the bigger pools, you know, like cities, city pools, YMCA's, even though that they are massive pools and they have lifeguards present, we're not anticipating that these pools are going to allow you know, 30, 40, 50 people from what it was like, you know, pre-pandemic. We're assuming that same measures will be kind of put in place in terms of bather load. So the key thing that we're looking for in the pool industry is the listing of measures on restaurants in particular, because we feel that our industry is very similar to that, where they're more or less going to, how do I describe it? They're more or less just going to say, well, okay, well, if we're going to open up restaurants, then we need to have tables within a certain length of each other or a certain distance of each other, and we can only have a certain amount of people in the dining area. Whereas we're expecting the same to be had for swimming pools, where, listen, you know, we can't have 30, 40, 50 people in the pool anymore. We might need to go down to something what kind of, you know, Jason was referring to in terms of attendance or booking schedules or something like that, to control the amount of people that are not only accessing the pool area, but primarily the change rooms as well, because the change rooms, you're likely going to have a higher chance of transmission in one of those areas as opposed to the pool area. I mean, that's still up for debate, but ultimately it's going to come down to the access to the shared accommodation, being the change rooms and washrooms and the pool area in particular. Yeah. So okay. That's kind of what we're anticipating on our end anyway.
Okay, now the second sort of element I'd like you to touch upon, and we're running out of time a bit, but it's the opening, the physical opening of the pool. And I'm thinking mainly of exterior pools. Some people, some corporations may be tempted to think, well, if we're not going to use it this summer, do we need to open it? Do we need to treat the water? Do we need can we just empty it? So like, what are the considerations that go into that with respect to the physical opening and maintenance of the pool?
Yeah, good question. So the big difference is the physical opening of the pool and the physical opening to users. So we're not discussing the physical opening to the users, we're just talking about the physical opening of the pool. So there's two big concerns that we need to look at. I know a lot of people right now are thinking to themselves, okay, well, I don't have to open the pool. I can save a little bit of money. I don't have to, you know, buy chemicals. But the problem is that with stagnant water present and without proper pool maintenance, including circulation and treatment of water, various pathogens can grow, such as, you know, pseudomonas, cryptosporidium, and E. coli, among others, that create a breeding ground for mosquitoes, pests, and that may carry diseases such as West Nile and pose a secondary risk to communities. So for a lot of these outdoor Class B pools, you know, a lot of them are right by people's backyards, they're right by people's balconies. And, you know, if you're leaving that water over the course of the summertime and it gets to, you know, 30, 40 degrees, and, you know, you're going to, you know, risk all those diseases and dead animals potentially coming into the pool. So now you've kind of created a secondary health hazard. So what we're trying to do, and which leads me into my second point, is what we're trying to do is tell people that, listen, we think that the best measure to do would be to drain your pool, to clean your pool, to prepare for a physical opening of the pool as if this is not going on. And I know I just say that haphazardly, but we're telling people that, you know what, the pool itself is a structure, and the pool is designed to have water in it. A lot of these in-ground pools that are not suspended have high water tables around them. So with a high water table around the empty pool shell, it essentially puts stress on the structure and could create you know, significant damage on the pool itself. So what we're telling people to do is to, you know, let's just play it as if nothing is happening right now. Let's clean it, let's fill it, let's balance it with chemicals. But also at the same time, I know that people have concerns about spending a lot of money on chemicals when nobody's swimming in the pool. And But we're telling people to operate minimally. Keep the sanitizer to a minimum. Keep the sanitizer to, or sanitizer meaning chlorine or salt, sorry, to a 1 part per million. We're saying keep the heat off for now. You don't need to take on that cost at the moment. You don't need to balance all the other specialty chemicals that come along with it. So keep a clean and clear pool, keep the sanitizer in there. And hey, you know what? If measures get lifted at some point or another for recreational entities, then that's also going to allow for a quick turnaround so that we can get bathers into that pool.
Perfect. Wonderful. Very good practical tips on both the questions pertaining to reopening to bather and reopening the actual physical pool. Ryan, I can't thank you enough for that. At the last minute, you jumped in. Thank you so much. You can stick around if you want, or if you have places to go, you can just sign off. But I wanted to thank you for this. So that's Ryan Van Ness from Ottawa Pool Works. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
No problem. And for the viewers at home, if you want to read every reason why you should not go back into a public pool, you can go and check the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And there's a section about COVID. That's not that scary. Go and check the section about other reasons, other concerns, and it will really drive home why you want to maintain your pools properly. Jason, we're going to have to skip over the workplace safety because we're running out of time, but that just means that you're hired for next week. We're going to push that to next week, and I apologize for that. You've put a lot of work. I wanted to put a lot of time on the amenities, and we did just that. So thank you for that, and we'll save your second segment for next week. Now, Catherine and Graham, very briefly, virtual board meetings. How do we deal with this? And Catherine, maybe focus on, it's not the same. Having a real life meeting and having a virtual board meeting, you got to prepare for them differently. Give us the manager's perspective and the director's perspective in less than 72 seconds.
Oh, well, you know I can't do that. I've been around long enough for that.
That
A lot of it boils
seconds.
down to preparation. And so the thing that managers have always done or long done is prepared a meeting package in advance. One of the great things about holding these meetings virtually is that we can literally be on the same page these days. So after having circulated that package in advance, there are opportunities now in a virtual meeting setting to share your screen with the attendees at the meeting so that they can see and look at the same part of the package as you are. When you're approving the agenda, when you're approving the minutes, when you're looking at proposals that you might be contemplating, or that new virtual meeting bylaw that you're going to add into the AGM package that you're scheduling during this emergency time. The other thing to consider is if you have an opportunity like this where all of the speakers can be visible, it's easy to actually see a hand raise or to use a hand raise tool that's on the screen here to acknowledge folks that want to speak. For somebody like Ryan, whose video is off or who's participating by phone, it also requires a little bit of extra discipline. So that means if people are participating by phone, the chair might poll them or ask them specifically. That gives them an opportunity to speak when they're welcome to do so. And it also will give you an indicator as to whether or not somebody has dropped off the call. So I think as we've been practicing and using these virtual tools, we've had the experience of checking in with folks to make sure that they're still on the line and you haven't lost quorum.
Okay.
Finally, facilitating it so that it is easily accomplished. So in other words, don't feel obligated to meet if you don't have decisions to be made. And I would maintain a regular schedule as opposed to, kind of pushing, a monthly meeting. These Zoom chats, it's actually out in the media, they're a little bit more tiring because the physical ability to read body language and things like that is easy. It is not delayed. And because virtual meetings are delayed, it can be a little more tiring. Also follow up afterwards in the same way you would have if you were in person. So your little list of to-dos, just so that everybody's on the same page in terms of who's doing what and what the responsibilities are going forward.
Wonderful. David, you were right. I put too much stuff on the agenda again. I'm the kind of guy that just can't get it up. At the Mexican buffet, I have one of everything. Okay, well, we're gonna, before Denise falls asleep, we're gonna talk about the AGMs and about, whether to postpone them, not postpone them. I think the landscape has changed on that, Denise. Maybe help us out with this.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. I mean, I've been crossing things off my notes because we're running out of time. So to hold the AGM or not, remember the April 24th order in council provided that all AGMs could be postponed if the last day to hold the AGM fell within the emergency period or was in that 30-day period following the end of the emergency period. Because the emergency period continues to be extended, as we know, and more recently to June the 2nd, and now that Bill 190 has permitted condominium corporations to hold AGMs virtually and use electronic voting for a period 120 days after the emergency ends, and I hope everyone's following me now, corporations that have postponed their AGMs may want to start picking a date now to hold your meetings virtually and through electronic voting within the next 3 or 4 months. So that was a change in position from last week, but that is what we are recommending now. The other thing I just wanted to mention, I wanted to answer one question that came on the chat because I think it's important. And the question is, do directors have to hold virtual owners meetings during the emergency? We know that the answer is no, because that AGMs can be postponed, but that's just AGMs. There are still requisition meetings or the loss of a quorum of the board or turnover meetings. So remember that those meetings have to be held, and that 120-day extension where you could hold virtual meetings and electronic voting, that only applies to AGMs. It doesn't apply to a requisition meeting or meetings, other owners' meetings that occur after the emergency period ends. That's it.
Right, wonderful. Okay, so you can either postpone your AGM or you can hold it electronically. And if you postpone it, there's the timeframes that you spoke about, Denise. Any considerations, like what goes into the equation when you decide to postpone or to hold it, Denise? What would you recommend to your clients? I take it there's not a one size fits all, but
No, that's right. There's various reasons for you holding your AGM, but just remember that 120-day period, because that will depend when the emergency period ends. So if it does end June 2nd, you will have that 120 days to hold your AGM virtually and electronic voting, unless you have a bylaw. So if you wait and hold your AGM later, you may not necessarily be able to do virtual meetings. But Rod, you're going to talk about that in terms of getting the bylaws passed now.
right, and our view is that the bylaw is still very much required. But it's not mandatory. So for this period of exception, which is up to 120 days following the end of the emergency period, you could hold your virtual AGMs and your virtual owners meetings without the requirement of a bylaw. So that's good news. And they needed to put that in place to allow people to go forward with these meetings, because otherwise, I mean, everything was being delayed. It was like a domino effect. But now is the time to consider adopting a bylaw, because we're all tasting this new way of doing business, this new virtual way, and people will want to continue to be able to do these meetings this way. And first, because even when we do say people can all meet and you can all be friends again, the reality is that it may not be advisable or desirable for people to be stacked up in a room, as a lot of your owners may not want to do that. And the virtual AGM and the virtual meeting and the electronic voting gives such facilities and such options for the owners, for busy owners, for traveling owners. And so now is the time to consider adopting a bylaw, in my view. But most importantly, these bylaws provide a framework that allows people to have valid and transparent and robust AGMs. Right now, under the order in council and under the new Bill 190, there's no sort of indication, no clue, no guidance as to how to hold these meetings. And that's very troubling for me, because people are going to start having AGMs on Skype or on FaceTime or on Facebook or whatever it is. TikTok is the next way. You'll have 45 seconds to have your AGMs. And so to me, you need to have a set of bylaws that will ensure to the owners that you'll have a transparent process, that there'll be full participation from the owners, that they will get to see everything in real time. Often people ask me, well, what goes in the bylaw? And I've seen a couple of bylaws now, a couple of models. And some of them fit on a matchbox. There's 2 paragraphs. Yes, you can have virtual AGMs. Yes, you can vote electronically. That, to me, very respectfully, is missing the target, because you're not putting in place the safeguards and the checks and balances that are required to make sure that you have true owner participation, true owner authentication, through voting authentication. You want to know who's voting. You want to know who's attending. You want to have a transparent meeting where everybody sees everybody or sees every question that's being asked. If you don't see the questions that are being sent my way, I can just merrily avoid them and ignore them, and you will never know that took place, right? It's too easy for me to sort of give a directions to the meeting, take it somewhere where the ownership doesn't want it to go. So to me, the bylaw needs to put in place all these safeguards that will ensure that you have a robust system, that your democratic system is like this integrity behind it, this transparency behind it, there's accountability behind it. You want the records. You want your bylaw to say, these things need to become records of the corporation. Because again, otherwise, if you do it on Instagram or whatever the app was where kids would send pictures and the picture would disappear right after, you don't want to have an AGM like that. You want the AGM to leave a trace. So to me, I think my message is, you should really consider adopting these bylaws. You should have a bylaw that meets your requirement, and now's the time to do it, because you can do it remotely, you can do it electronically. So
Rod,
that's, yes.
couple of things.
Yes.
First of all, it's a good point that you raised there. I mean, there was a reason that you and I worked on this bylaw with Josh, and it took us a week with managers chiming in. So it's really important that you get a good comprehensive bylaw. Just to give some people context, our bylaw is 2 pages, 2 legal size pages. So you know, shorter than that, you got a problem.
Yeah.
The other
And when we worked on that, Denise, we had managers input, and we had input from the various service providers. I mean, there's CondoVoters, there's others, there's Get Quorum, there's others, and we actually spoke to all of these providers to make sure that the bylaw would meet, would sort of match where technology is, and now at this point it would be flexible also to move forward. So there's more to it than meets the eye.
I wanted to just raise another point, because many corporations are going forward with their AGMs, and I think when you go forward with your AGM, you should put this bylaw on the agenda. So make sure you add that. If you're not going to do a bylaw meeting and do an AGM, just put the bylaw on your agenda.
Absolutely. And what's the majority required for this kind of bylaw, Denise?
As long as you have 25% quorum at the meeting, it's a majority vote of those present, or if you have proxy or by electronic vote.
Right. So a simple majority, which is the majority of those participating to the meeting. Now, some people have asked us, and we're sort of running out of time. I think we're going to need a meeting, a webinar just on AGMs, Denise and folks, because I think this is the signal I'm getting. But what I'm the last thing I was going to say about these AGMs is there's various permutation and options. So some people will turn it all to a service provider, like CondoVoter, for instance. Other people, what they'll do is they'll turn the voting element to the service provider, but they'll chair and host their own AGM, right? I mean, if you know what you're doing and if you do it properly, there's all sorts of platforms out there. There's Zoom, which is what we're using today, but there's GoToWebinar. There's all sorts, right? So some people may decide to delegate the voting, electronic voting, to a third-party provider simply because they have the technology and they do it well, and they authenticate the votes, and that's a good way of doing it. And other corporations will delegate or push out both to these providers. You host the meeting and you deal with the voting. Depending on the size of your condo corporation, you may be able to hold it yourself, as I said, and find a platform that works for you. So there's all sorts of permutations here. In 30 seconds or less, Super Dave, a question that keeps coming up and I keep postponing it. What happens if I postpone my AGM and my director, his or her term expires or should have expired by now? What happens? Do they just evaporate, these directors? What happens to them?
It's funny. I actually put the answer in the chat already because I figured we were going to jump over it. But again, answer. The director's term continues until they are replaced at the subsequent meeting.
So they will continue until they're replaced at a subsequent meeting, which is another reason why you may or may not want to call your AGM now. There's no reason to sort of delay it any longer. Okay, now this, we've covered that. Very good. We've hit the end, folks. We're at the end of the presentation. It was fast and furious. Once again, I've put too much stuff on my plate. But I'd like to thank everybody, all of our speakers who took the time to come and share their knowledge with us. And I'm going to do as I usually do. I'm going to go around the table and I'm going to thank you. And I'm going to ask you if you have any parting words. Super Nanny, Catherine Gow, any
Slow
comments?
but steady wins the race. So I know that everybody's really eager to kind of get back out onto their common elements and into their amenity spaces. It's going to be longer rather than shorter, right? So I would start having that conversation with homeowners so that their expectations are set appropriately. Condominiums are not going to open at the same time as, say, the Good Life Fitness down the street. And in being reductionistic, the considerations that Jason and I'm sorry, I've forgotten the pool fellow's name, have
Ryan
in front of us, Ryan, are going to be our guidance, and we're going to need to evaluate those before we can open them. And we don't want to have to go backwards. So we're going to be slower rather than faster.
You're using your time for next week, Catherine. I'm going to keep track of that. From Lash Condo Law, Denise Lash, thank you so very much. Any parting words, Denise?
On the amenity issue, I was going to say owners' waivers and signage is not good enough. Don't open those amenities and don't rely on owners signing waivers.
Right, right. We ran out of time to talk about the liability associated with rushing through opening these, because the liability rests on the condominium corporation's shoulder. At the end of the day, if something happens, if there's a flare up, if there's they're going to turn to the condo corporation, because the condo corporation is responsible. Is the occupier of the amenities. Turning to Grizzly Adam from the condo lawyer from Gowling WLG, Graham McPherson. Thanks so much. Any parting words, buddy?
For my parting words, I'm just going to thank everybody who's in attendance today and thank you all for your questions. You know, we understand that there's a lot of questions, and as the situation keeps evolving, it just leads to more questions. And we do try to get to all of them in these presentations, and we do appreciate when you send them. So please continue to do so, and we will continue to address them in upcoming presentations.
Wonderful. David Plotkin, lawyer, condo lawyer with Gowling WLG. Parting words.
Just because you can doesn't mean you have to. The question is always, should you? And that's what we are trying to get across in this presentation and others. Ask the question, should you be opening X amenity? What are the liabilities for it? And if you're unsure, discuss it with your professional.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. Jason Reed from the National Life Safety Group. Can't thank you enough for these charts, for all the work you've put into that. We'll upload it obviously on the Condo Advisor website, but big bravo Zulu to you. Thanks so much. Parting words, Jason?
Yeah, listen, thank you again for, I love this stuff, as you know. Listen, I'm big on documentation. So those charts really allow you to weigh that documentation. And when the documentation kind of swings the other way, you're good to open. But right now, they're all looking like this.
Right. Okay. Sean Cornish, first time tonight with us. Hopefully you'll join again next week. I didn't tell you that, but you were signing up for the season, buddy. Any parting words, Sean?
You know, Rod, since you invited me, I've been thinking, I have to think of some good words for the end of this presentation because he'll always be asking. But you put me last and everyone took my good points. Effectively, I think Catherine summed it up really well for me as well as David. Slow and steady. There's no rush. There shouldn't be a rush. It's going to be tough for managers to say no to board members or owners, but we need to do it. Catherine, I think in our earlier conversation mentioned the standard of care for board members, and that's a critical thing to keep in mind. That at the end of the day, it's a responsibility to all the owners, to the corporation, to limit the liability and the harm to the owners.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sean. So folks at home, that's it for us today. Episode 9 ends on a positive note with all these good good pieces of advice. Next week, Wednesday, May 20th at 5 p.m., we're going to have another one of those until you tell us to stop, until we run out of topics, which I don't think is about to happen. You'll need to register again. You know how to register. You need to go to the Condo Advisor website, the webinar tab at the top. Click on that, and we'll put the agenda there. We'll also put a link to our future webinars, but the registration form, that's where it's found. At the same time, do send questions, because I spend the weekend trying to put together an agenda based on the questions that we've gotten so far. I'd like to thank you for tuning in week after week, and many of you are the same. So I'd like to thank the Peanut Gallery in the chat room. I'd like to thank them for answering the questions. I see John's there. I see all sorts that I recognize. Good advice from all these people, and thank you so much for chiming in. That's it for us, folks. Thank you very much. Have a great week. See you next week. Same channel, same time with the same characters. Take care. Be safe. Thanks.